Hello, my name is Josh Masseo. I'm with AVIO Consulting. I'm here to talk to you about doing PKI with Vault. I'm just a nerd. I like computers, guitars, racing, flying. I started as a SysAdmin back in the 90s for a little ISP in Dallas-Fort Worth, and now I am a managed services architect for AVIO Consulting. I am Terraform certified. I'll be Vault certified probably later in the month or early next month. And I work for AVIO, which is a great place. So AVIO, we're a consulting company. Our primary focus these days is on MuleSoft development and providing managed services to customers who run MuleSoft. MuleSoft is a piece of enterprise codeless technology that allows people to develop APIs with agility. We are also a HashiCorp SI partner. I think SI means systems integrator. I was a Hashi zealot before I started here. I've used all of their tools extensively in open source, in their open source form at previous employment. We offer DevOps consulting. This is a relatively new branch to us. We're working on growing it. It's a big market these days. People can't find DevOps folks very quickly, so they need to hire them out. We also offer Appian, which is a no-code like API front-end tool. It's pretty cool. Not really my side of the house. I'm an architect and engineer, not a sales guy. So without further ado, let's talk about HashiCorp. HashiCorp offers what they call the cloud operating model. And they'd like to break it up, this is their marketing speak, into these 4 layers: provisioning, security, connecting, and running. So we're going to focus on that second layer today, which is Vault, the security offering. If you're not using Terraform, you should. Just going to say that. It'll make your life easier. I promise it will make your life easier. Console, it does service discovery and mesh networking now, and Nomad is one of their newer products. It's still growing. If you have an extensive hybrid environment with multi-cloud or cloud and on-premise, actual on-premise equipment, Nomad is definitely worth taking a look at because it can bridge those gaps for you. So the Vault system, it offers a lot of different security features for an enterprise environment. The one we're going to talk about today, of course, is PKI, but we'll just go through them real quickly. Encryption as a service, you can send data to Vault, and it will return the encrypted data back without you ever knowing the private key or public key, whatever is the case for that particular service you're using. It can handle authentication and identity consolidation. You can have a user on Vault that maps to an OAuth user, an LDAP user, or a local username password. I got into Vault initially because it's a secret store. Basically, it's key value, kind of like console, but encrypted. It came out before we had Amazon Secrets Manager or Azure Secrets or any of these other things. So I got into it initially as a secure place to keep my passwords for my applications, and it just grew from there. The next thing I used it for was PKI and SSL. I had a problem I needed to solve with SSL where, we'll talk about it in a minute. It can issue transient credentials. What this means is that it can give you a username and password that doesn't work in 30 minutes. And it can give you a username and password to a Postgres database. It can give you Amazon key pairs. It can give you SSH keys. It can give you any of these credentials that will then time out. It can also, there's plugins for secret rotation. If you ever use Amazon Secrets Manager, it kind of has a similar function, although it's not as robust. But basically, it will go out and recycle the passwords on your database servers or your web servers for you on a schedule. With the Amazon products, you have to write a Lambda job for it and tie it all together. With Vault, it has a Golang plugin that does all this for you. And Vault, of course, it touches a lot more stuff because it has such an active community. If there's not a plugin to rotate the secrets that you want to rotate, someone was going to write one, or you can write one. I've had to write a lot of stuff for HashiTools over the years because they're very popular now, but when I started with Terraform, there wasn't quite the support. Now they have all these plugins, they have groups inside HashiCorp which help maintain them. So you're no longer at the whim of the community. They can help you too. So what is PKI? Public key infrastructure. If you have a good PKI system, it means that you have a CA, you have revocation lists, you have OSCP, you have all of the things that go along with operating asymmetrical keys in your environment. I like to say here you have a sane and functioning certificate authority because you've probably seen a lot of not so sane and unfunctioning certificate authorities. Quick touch on SSL. SSL, we don't use SSL anymore. We still call it SSL, we don't use it. If you're using SSL on your web server, turn it off, please. It's not secure, the hashes are deprecated. Everything about SSL 1, 2, and 3 is deprecated and no longer secure. You should be running the latest version of TLS. Good luck on that. Your software may not support it. It's new, but you've got to do it. SSL in real life is kind of a beating. If you're like me, you're almost never coming into contact with SSL from a point of, oh, this is going to be fine, everything's great, I'm just going to replace the certificate and everything's going to work out. No, you're coming into contact with SSL because something broke somewhere, or you weren't monitoring your certificate expirations, and now you have a fire. Most people, they only deal with SSL when they're firefighting. Vault can help you with that because it will make firefighting simpler. You'll know where to go to look at your certs. You know how to reissue certs. You know your certs will be built with the correct parameters to work in the environment that you define them in, which is not something you can say for other tools. A lot of the times we try to deal with these SSL problems when you run into them with self-signed certificates. You can't really do that for things like authentication because you have to have the CA. So at some point, you're going to have a CA. It doesn't have to, it's not obviously not going to be a global internet CA, but you have to have something locally in your environment. Ideally, something that you can load into your Java Trust Store or your Windows Trust Store, your Mac Trust Store, so that just in the context of web pages or VPN connections, they're not getting these untrusted certificate errors, which in some instances will prevent your software from working. Vault basically lets you do a self-signed certificate, but correctly, so that you build the CA infrastructure instead of just fudging these certs together over and over again. Vault is not the only thing that does PKI. There are lots of projects out there. There's Dogtag, there's a bunch. Free IPA does it, Puppet does it, Active Directory does it. When you go to solve these problems initially, you're going to be inclined to use the thing you have. You know what, most of us have Active Directory, so we're like, you know what, we're just going to generate the certificates from Active Directory and trust the CA store and everything's going to be fine, until it's not. I just had a customer production problem where if you've ever worked in Microsoft LAN, you might have learned that sometimes SSL turns into landmines. If you've worked with the LDAP side of the Active Directory server, or if you've worked with SQL Server, just installing an SSL server certificate on this server will enable the SSL capabilities of SQL Server and LDAP, and you cannot turn them off. So if, for instance, your CA is using, I believe it's RSSPSA hash algorithm, no Java applications written for JDK before 11 will connect to it. You'll get some nebulous error and spend the next 4 hours reading Stack Overflow trying to figure out what to do. And then you realize, well, I can't just renew every single certificate in my environment. So you run into those issues. Whereas if you were coming in with if you know what you want with PKI when you start building your environment, everything's going to be a lot simpler. It just doesn't ever happen like that. So in that case, we had to just turn off all of the SSL certificates on the server to get the applications working again, because the software was not supported on JDK's newer than 8. So we had no possible workarounds, but just one SSL problem you can run into. And there's so many. Why Vault? I got a couple kind of a little bit snarky. You should already have it in your environment. If you don't have it, what are you using instead? What are you using for secrets management? Are you rotating credentials? Probably not. You might be using Auth0 or something like that for like identity consolidation, but when it comes to secrets management, that's the core use case that gets Vault installed a lot of places. So I recommend it for that anyway. Also, if you're doing transient secrets, it's cheaper than paying Amazon if you have a large scale amount of microservices with transient secrets. You might be using Amazon Secret Manager or whatever already. So why use Vault? It's got all the bells and whistles. It does everything correctly. It's easy to use. It's easy to set up. The setup of CA, I'm not going to do a demo, but it's a 10-minute blog article on learn.hashicorp.com. And it shows you how to do it in using the Vault CLI tool. It shows you how to do it with curl commands, and it shows you how to do it with their new web UI. When I did most of my Vault work, the web UI did not exist. It's nice, it's new. You can do a lot more, less flipping through documentation and HTTP APIs, but it is API driven. So I was talking to Paul. He had a customer, and they're using Active Directory CA, and in their application deployment scripts, they call Active Directory CA, get a certificate, and load it onto the app. Well, you can do the same thing with Vault, and I recommend you do, because everything should be TLS encrypted end-to-end these days, right? And that's the best practice. That's a standard. This gives you a way to do it reasonably, because you can do everything with HTTP calls. You can manage your CA. I mean, all of it is very simple to do. And now that it has the web UI, it's even easier, because you can point and click your way to glory. Console template. If any of you guys run console or Vault, you may have used this already. It basically sets up watches on your cluster, either console or Vault. Usually, traditionally the two go together. That's may change soon. But you watch console, and when things change, it will execute and replace files based on templates that are defined with Go template, something very analogous to Go template, and write out these files. So if you need to change certificates, now you probably shouldn't be running your servers for a year to clip in today's livestock, not pets world, but if for whatever your server's been up too long, you can use console template and it will recycle the certificates and then reload the application. So it's a very useful tool for working with configuration data in the Hashi ecosystem. And of course I say, you've already got a CA because you're using it for signed SSH keys, right? Right, wrong, no? Well, maybe next time. So my case study is I had to merge two console clusters, and we'd built them. One was massive. It was built with Puppet. It was in 12 Amazon regions and 6 Azure regions, I think, was what it was. And we built it, we made it use the Puppet CA certificate. And Puppet, if you've used Puppet, it's all TLS. But the way it solves the problem is it has its own CA, and when you register the host, it gets a certificate. Well, you can't really access this functionality outside of the Puppet ecosystem. And I'm trying to join 100 clients from a Ansible managed environment that was built by another silo in my organization. So I wanted to use the Puppet CA because it's deployed everywhere already. I've got hundreds of systems set up that I don't want to reconfigure. So decision made, well, I'm going to use Vault. Now I said, yeah, I'm using the Puppet CA, and I'm supposed to use the Puppet CA, but you know what, I had it. I had the Puppet CA. It was deployed. The code was everywhere. I'm merging two clusters. Let's just keep using the Puppet CA versus trying to reinvent the wheel. So Vault will let you can generate a CA certificate within Vault, or you can import one. A little caveat though, if you generate a certificate within Vault, you have to specify certain options or you will not be able to export the private key from it. So if you do that, just bear that in mind. It's like internal versus external for the type of CA cert. Yeah, I talked about that. So deploying these certificates, we used Ansible to consolidate everything. And this is the script. I mean, I log into Vault, I retrieve an SSL certificate, and then I deploy it to the local file system. And it is done. Now, the log into Vault part is very interesting because it can be done so many ways. So this code, you may not have to execute this on your CI/CD server. You might execute it from user data using app roles or app IDs or a different kind of authentication method where you build transient credentials into your servers or pass them in as arguments. Or you log in with an LDAP account, and any number of ways you can log in, but the rest of it is pretty, you just ask for a cert, you get it back, you break it out, and you write it out. So Vault relies on console. And console you're supposed to set up with SSL. But if you don't have Vault already, now you're supposed to build this TLS environment but you don't have a CA yet. So this is kind of a pain, but because you can import a CA, you can just generate a CA. You can either do it with Vault or you can do it with OpenSSL, EasyCA, whatever you're used to. But you can build that CA and then use it to configure console and then load it into Vault when you're ready to deploy it to the rest of your environment. Hashi says you should run Vault on a dedicated console cluster. So this might not be an issue for you because there might not be any other servers connecting to that particular console server. Also, there's something called integrated Raft backend. So this obviates the need for a console cluster to run Vault. It basically takes the Raft protocol, which is what console runs on. Console has two protocols, Surf and Raft. I believe Raft is the data center, cross data center replication. One is like LAN-based and one is WAN-based. I think Raft is the WAN-based replication protocol they use. It's just a way of their solving the CAP problem. So this will allow them to no longer use the console backend, and all of your state will be retained locally in Vault. So it can be kind of like a standalone cluster. What else does it do? There's a lot of things beyond PKI. One that's kind of in the CA world is these SSH key signatures. You can use Vault, and you provide it with your public key and tell it to authenticate off a CA. You provide it your public key, the username, and the host, I believe. It will sign the CA request. It will sign I think it's a token, right? It says it's a SSH key, but it's more like a Java web token, right? So when you connect to a server that has this technology enabled, you send it your -I, your private key, and then you also do -I with this key that's returned from Vault. And this key that's returned from Vault is like a JWT. It has your username, like what username you're allowed to authenticate as, your actual public key, and then I think one or two other pieces of data. But basically it allows you to furnish your own access credentials, and it accepts them because it knows they're trusted by your CA. So it's a pretty good use of trust, I think. Unfortunately, it's new, relatively new, and the permissions management in Vault is a little rough still. So I feel like this is a feature that's going to become more useful as time goes on, more so than maybe it is right now. Right now, the use case for this is all my users don't have logins on a server. They all use EC2 user or whatever. So in Vault, I can set up a permissions profile where these users can send a request for EC2 user, and it will approve it. And then when you send that key back to the server, it will let you log in as EC2 user. But because you have to manually configure the permissions in Vault, kind of on a case-by-case basis, if you had 10 users, you would need 10 different permissions configurations for them. So it's kind of frustrating in that it's not really great at that level of like transient SSH keys. It's good for transient SSH keys to EC2 user or Ubuntu or whatever the default user or your user is on the server, but it's not very good at individual transient SSH keys for individual login accounts. So I hope that's a feature that we see coming soon, just because it'd be nice to have, especially versus like an LDAP configuration. Just because I don't like the point of failures you get there, and you have to provide custom code for public keys and all this other stuff. So it does a bunch of other things. Provides unified identity management. Basically, I can have a Vault user, and it maps to other identity sources, OAuth 2, a Vault local username and password, or an LDAP account, an AWS session token or access key can also be used to identify yourself to Vault. It has secrets management and key value store. This is the thing that got Vault in my world in the first place, is having this secure secret storage. My lead was very security focused, and so everything had to be SSL, everything had to be securely handled. We'd used Ansible Vault for a while, but that's not, I don't like it. Everything has to be committed to the same Git repo. Kind of, you have to maintain this separate password vault yourself, and you can't use it in other applications. It's just, they tried to solve a problem. They did an okay job, but HashiVault is better. I mean, you can use HashiVault from Ansible or anything. Yeah, if you've ever used Ansible, it has lookup plugins. That's what you would use for this. You can also have it be your key value, your secret store in Kubernetes. It'll integrate there. That's a relatively new development. Nomad speaks it natively. Console template works with it. It would be nice if you could use it with things like ECS, Amazon Elastic Container Service, or some of these other orchestration tools that are kind of closed. Sometimes you end up siloed on the cloud, but you cannot yet. You have to write custom code that, as part of your job, that will call Vault and retrieve secrets, right? Usually you'll give it like app ID and app role. Like, I think it's app role. There's two of them that have really similar names, and they deprecated one of them a while ago. There's app ID and there's app role, and one of them is deprecated, but they both kind of do similar things. So when you create your container, you can just issue it transient credentials, and it will call back. I like to do that. Transient SSH keys, work in progress still, I think. It's useful, but it's got a ways to go. Transient AWS credentials. This is really useful because your level 0 techs or whomever don't have to have real AWS credentials. You can just issue them on the fly, and then they go away. Because key leakage is one of the bigger security risks in the cloud is, you lose your access credentials, or people commit them in code or whatever. If your credentials expire for 30 minutes, it doesn't matter if someone put them in Git. So, and you can use it to provide authentication to your own applications. We did this at my last gig. We used their internal authentication. We'd create these identities and then map them to the different auth engines we had, whether it be Amazon or internal or LDAP, because we also had our own internal authentication platform that contacted Vault. So we would use that internally for microservices and also for user authentication to the applications. So it got used in two places by our applications. Authenticate between cross-application communication, and then authenticate client authentication. All of this is in open source Vault. What's the difference between the different platforms? So I just cut and paste this at the last minute so I could go over it. The first column is open source. The second one is, I don't remember what it's called, and the third one was enterprise. They're different pricing tiers. These are the only differences. All of the useful features, they're not on this list. This is all enterprise grade, like Sentinel integration. Sentinel is HashiCorp's, how do I describe it? Kind of a role-based, like RBAC, but for resources. So you can write these overarching policies that sit on top of the Hashi ecosystem and control access. So you can have a Sentinel policy that defines above and beyond things that the Vault internal permissions do, like only this user can access these things. But you're really using Sentinel over that because you want to use it with other things like Terraform. This user can only build these modules. This user can only build these resources. I've only touched it a little bit getting ready for my certification exams. I've not yet had a chance to interact with Sentinel in a while. HSM auto unseal, you're probably not going to use this at this point unless you have on-prem. You're running Vault physically in your environment on Metal. Because otherwise you're going to use AWS KMS unseal or Azure unseal. It has Vault unseal methods for different clouds. So that, a little backstory so that this makes sense. Vault traditionally used something called a Samir key, I think it was. That's what it means down here at HSM auto unseal. You would have a key that you split 3 ways or 4 ways and give it to a couple of engineers. And then if the system gets restarted or closed, you have to unseal the Vault to gain access to the inside. And you'd have to present all of these pieces of the shared key at the same time in order to unlock the Vault, or else you wouldn't get access again. And as long as that one piece isn't on his USB stick, it just got crushed when he got hit by a bus, this works great. But I don't like it when my phone rings in the middle of the night, so I want if, for whatever reason, Amazon breaks my Vault server, which is the most likely outcome, right? I'm running the cloud, oh, it's deprecated, or service impaired, or, it got Amazoned. And it's gonna restart. I want it to restart and reopen the Vault. I don't want it to call me. I don't want to get 40 pages saying application X can no longer authenticate. I just wanted to fix it, right? So the auto unseal stuff, that's a relatively new development in Vault. And the ones that are not shared key based, I believe, are open source. So auto unseal with Amazon is open source. Multi-factor authentication, that might be an issue for you. Replication, that could definitely be an issue for you. But we just snapshotted everything. They didn't have that as a feature when I did most of my deployments. It's a relatively new one. We also have disaster recovery and namespaces. I guess everything needs namespaces these days. I haven't really looked at the disaster recovery portion either. So, I like it. It's solved a bunch of problems for me. All of HashiCorp's tools have solved problems for me, and made my life easier. So I'm more than happy to come evangelize for them because, I get paid, it gets me paid, and it makes my life easier. So I'm a big fan. That's pretty much what I've got for Vault. If anybody has any questions or use cases you want to talk about, anything like that?
So how I'm protecting the HTTP interfaces, I'm trying to set up a trust hierarchy with Vault PKI, and of course you mentioned it too. By default, it's HTTP unless I go ahead and do some OpenSSL magic, create some keys there in place when I stand at the Vault instance before actually doing any kind of configuration.
Right.
One thing I went ahead and did was for my root, I was like, okay, honestly, I don't even want to have to deal with these keys because I was using Ansible Vault to protect the private key with a password and trying to be able to commit that, and it was just, no, this is too clunky. And so what I moved to was localhost only for the root. So that way I use SSH port forwarding to use SSH as my protective mechanism to then create the backend root system. And I guess from there, my question was, have you ran into any instances where the Vault commands over CLI or other? Because I'm thinking in my production environments, I'm not even gonna be able to do that, where I can port forward directly to my box to be able to get a web page. Have you found any limitations with the Vault commands to just be able to stand it up via SSH solely? Because it just seems like there's some things I can't even add to a configuration file, like the audit log. Writing to an audit log, I have to go and run a command. And so now I'm trying to figure out, how do I fork this into my CI/CD that I'm trying to create with Ansible, idempotent kind of plays, so I can just rerun. And I'm kind of thinking, okay, maybe do a check if it's installed, then go ahead and run these commands as a check to see if they're actually ran, like the Vault audit, because I didn't even see a command line. But I mean, have you ran into those kind of issues whenever standing it up, like being able to have certain configuration items in place after you ran, like partial automation and then manual partial automation afterwards?
Well, so I already had the public CA when I built my big environment. But in terms of authenticating, you're supposed to keep Vault off the public internet, right? So you're right to use SSH tunneling. It used to be that the CLI did not have all of the functions that were accessible through the API. So when I did it, I had to do everything through the HTTP API because I couldn't do the Vault write to PKI to issue a certificate. It wasn't supported yet. You can turn Vault up in dev mode and use that to create a certificate, which is probably what I do because it's just easier than OpenSSL doing it by hand.
So you're saying start with your root certificate and then at build time import that as your root into Vault and then start building out the rest of PKI from there.
Right.
Nice.
Because, I mean, you may be having to take something that's already existing. Right? It's going to depend on your use case. If you're starting from scratch and writing in from a whole cloth, you just use Vault and build the certificate that way. Just make sure you specify it as external so you can get those keys out of Vault later. If you specify it as internal, Vault won't give up the keys later. There's no way to export them. So, and there's like a whole slew of arguments you can pass in when you create the CA or any certificate, depending what you want it to be used for, and expirations and stuff. I recommend for your CA, it's probably not the most secure way to do it, but it's it's easier because you may have to replace it. You're going to have to replace certificates as time goes on, right? So you don't want to create your CA with 6 months or 12-month life cycle because that's just going to come back and haunt you. So I like 5 or 10 years on my CA. You can do intermediates with a lower life cycle or lifespan, and your node certs or service certs can be I would probably try to plan on what your realistic lifespan is. I picked a year one time because I thought all these servers are immutable. They lived longer than a year, and then I had to go back and fix them. If you have the revocation working and accessible through to all of your clients, then longer certificates isn't such a bad idea. But if you don't have working revocation, then longer certificates become more of a security risk because if one is leaked, you don't have a sane way to get rid of it without, time to refresh the entire PKI infrastructure, and we don't want to do that. But also console is not going to be needed much longer. So, I mean, I like console anyway, but you might not have a use for it, right? I like it for service discovery and for non-critical key value store.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear you're actually having the raft only as a backend because and time is one problem, but I decided it was too much of another system to have to try to kind of protect as my backend for Vault. And so it was like, I'm just using file system. I'm hoping snapshots, at least until we figure out a better way to do this, is kind of where we're at right now.
This is a problem that it kind of exists in, it's an obstacle in HashiCorp environment. The fact that you need 3 of everything, right? It's like, I want to mess with Nomad more, but I don't want to pay for 3 new nodes. I got to have 3 nodes for Nomad, then 3 nodes for console, then 3 nodes for, I've got like 12 nodes in my environment now just to play with this stuff. Look, don't get me wrong, when I had 12 regions or 16 regions, I don't care because I've got thousands of servers. what a little bit of extra, bookkeeping didn't really factor in. But in my current environment, I'm turning up servers that are more onesie-twosie. And so having this massive infrastructure surrounding the HashiCorp environment is kind of troubling. I've been trying to figure out ways that I can share infrastructure across clients. It's kind of work in progress because I do like the Hashi products. So we've been putting more time and research into figuring out how we can use things like console in our MuleSoft practice because they're not really like in the same world, right? Go ahead.
Yeah, Mike Matthijs was asking on the Twitch chat, do you find value in creating an offline route and making Vault an intermediate CA?
You can do that and just keep your primary offline. I think you can do that. So usually with intermediates, I've never actually created an offline intermediate and loaded it in. I've created intermediates within Vault.
I think he's saying creating the offline route and then making Vault your intermediate.
I am pretty sure you can do that. You can because
CRLs and make the certificate distribution link on your subs.
right.
And you should be able to be just fine. Just make that part of your certificate build parameters in Vault in
Yeah.
PKI because I know they're there, but I've only seen them in the UE. So like a lot of my question on the is the command line got limitations, and I feel like it does. But yes, tell Mike that.
Yeah, here, I'll let you tell him.
Oh yeah, Mike, you can totally do that. So you keep that offline, and what you do on your route, whenever you go ahead and issue that or create that, make sure that your certificate distribution link or CRL, and as well as your CRL links point to the sub-issuing CAs. And I believe I put a 1-year period on my CRL, so just make sure you spin up your offline route at least once a year or every 9 months, however you want to do it. To make sure you're not over, to re-sign those and distribute it back out to the subs to have them available to your clients that are validating the certificate trust chain.
Okay. Now that said, Vault has like this whole other separate set of interfaces for dealing with intermediates. So I'm not entirely certain how those two things interplay, but I am relatively confident that you can accomplish this just with the correct incantations.
All right, well, thank you. I think we're good.
All right. Well, thank you all very much for having me. It's my pleasure. I hope this was useful, informative, or entertaining, at least one of the three. And again, thank you very much.